The new husband, the future stepdad, is an ex-Marine. He has no children. He's never been married before. He didn't really know how hard family life is. He's marrying a woman who has 3 children. He calls her on the phone, and they were talking about a few things, and he said, hey, regarding the kids and parenting, just tell your kids that when you and I get married, the Marines have landed.
Ooh.
All right? Well, what happened was he came in and the Marines landed. He made the rules. He started barking. He expected people to jump when he said jump. And eventually, it just began to really create a whole lot of stress in the marriage. From the Family Life Podcast Network, this is Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. This donor-supported podcast helps blended families and those that love them pursue the relationships that matter most. I'm so glad you've joined us in this journey. Welcome to episode number 57, The Smart Stepdad. And I've got a book bonus for you. At the end of this episode, hang on for a special Get Smart segment from my book, The Smart Stepdad. Hey, Father's Day is just around the corner, so obviously we're focusing on stepdads in this episode. And for that, we've got another Family Life Today flashback for you. And this one covers many seasons or phases of being a stepdad, dating and considering becoming a stepfather, and how you become successful once you become a stepdad. Now, let me set the scene. Before I joined the staff here at Family Life, I was invited to be on Family Life Today, the national radio broadcast, and now a podcast of Family Life. And periodically, we share on this podcast one of those broadcasts because the principles that are discussed are timeless. We like to call them Family Life Today flashbacks, and that's what we've got for you in this episode. So the first voices you'll hear are those of Dennis Rainey, the host of Family Life Today at that time, and Bob Lepine. I was a guest on that program. And I should explain, the first thing you're going to hear Bob reference on the program are the shoes on the cover of the original edition of The Smart Stepdad. Now, if you happen to have a more recent edition of that book, well, you're looking at it and wondering where the shoes are. Well, they're not there anymore. So, nevertheless, no matter which book you have in front of you, you as a stepdad are stepping into an important set of shoes. And with that thought, let's jump in. Here's our latest Family Life Today flashback on Family Life Blended, The Smart Stepdad.
I'm wondering why Ron Deal put, I think these are Doc Martens on the front of his book, para loafers, but I think they're Doc Martens. And that yellow stitching around the top, isn't that characteristic of the Doc Marten? Do you know?
Ron?
I don't have a clue.
You got to be careful around Bob. I'm telling you, he's tough on you.
Did you pick the shoes for the cover of the book?
I did not pick the shoes. I influenced. I know which ones I did not pick.
Okay. But
every author knows about that. All the covers you reject. No doubt about that.
Is the idea here that if you're going to be a smart stepdad, you got some big shoes to step into? Is that the idea?
Yeah, that and yes, and in a way, you're also stepping into somebody else's shoes, but that person's already in their shoes, and it gets a little confusing.
All right. Okay.
And so you challenge a stepdad. You say, steps to help you succeed. You really have a heart for stepdads.
Thank you. It's
Sorry
great to
we
be back.
critiqued your cover right off the start.
Wasn't a critique. I was just curious about...
you were critiquing it, Bob. Don't give
The shoes do look a little scuffed up, too, I think.
Ron Deal is an author, a speaker, and he has written the book, The Smart Stepdad. I didn't realize this, Bob, but 16.5 million men are stepdads today.
That's a big chunk of the population.
16% of all men will bear this title. So you're talking to millions of men who step into these shoes, and they're going to find it's much more difficult to do this thing called being a stepfather than they ever imagined.
And many of them have the biggest hearts in the world, and they come in and they want to be the hero. You know, they want to do a good job. And God bless them for having the heart for that. Sometimes what they experience when they get there is it's kind of like a first day on a new job, and people didn't know you were showing up, and they really rather wish the other guy was here instead of you, and his name is still on the door. You're moving into his office, and you're really unclear what performing well on the job would look like. How do I hit the bullseye here in my new job? And it's unclear. And some people are telling you it looks like this, and other people are telling you it looks like this. And you're thinking, well, who's on my team and who's not on my team? And all of that confusion hits stepdads pretty quickly.
Well, and you add to that, it may be that in your last job, things didn't go so well, and there were challenges, and there's still some anger and bitterness from the previous place you used to work,
right,
that left you feeling a little insecure about your role in the first place, and now here you are stepping into the new assignment. You got to acknowledge when you step into a role as either a stepmom or a stepdad, you have to acknowledge that there's some stuff in this pot of stew that you have been cooking up here that's going to have to be dealt with.
Yeah, and an application of what you just said about the former job, I mean, many stepdads are biological dads. They have their own children, and they may live with them or they may not. They may be here on a part-time basis, and so really you kind of have two jobs. And one of those jobs is very clear. It's very clear what it is to be the dad, but it's just not so clear to be the stepdad. And that's what we want to do with this book, is offer them direction. As
human beings, we tend to be idealistic. And we enter into this new relationship. There's a honeymoon, and maybe we did go through something where we experienced divorce in the past, and we've got that set of bags that we bring into the marriage relationship like we're talking about here. But don't you find that as couples form blended families, that they have some unreal expectations about how it's going to work?
Absolutely. The expectations are, built on the fantasy. And really, we need the fantasy. We need the dream, because there's a lot of risks in life we wouldn't take if we didn't have a dream wrapped around it. And I think that's often true about remarriage, about becoming a step-parent. And the dream isn't necessarily bad or wrong. I want stepdads and stepparents to hold on to that dream. But at the same time, it needs to be tempered with reality. It needs to be tempered with truth about their circumstances. And then as they step this out, they're going to make better choices.
Well, if you grew up in the generation that watched the Brady Bunch, I mean, is that not the quintessential definable step family?
Absolutely.
Or you rented the movie Yours, Mine, and Ours, and you thought, well, okay, so they make it work. And you forget the fact that somebody had to write lines for them, and somebody had to create scenarios for them, and that's fiction, and that real life can be a little more complicated and a little more confusing.
And the storyline isn't over in 2 hours.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, we believe in love in our culture, and I'm glad that we do. We really do think love is going to conquer all, and we think that if our love is pure enough and a man and woman come together, that the children will come together as well around that. And sometimes that's true, and sometimes, more often than is the case, it's true eventually. It's just not true immediately. And it's that period of disillusionment that really is a barrier for a lot of people.
I want to ask you, I want to take you all the way back to kind of the headwaters of somebody who is considering a remarriage situation. I'll give you the scenario. This is somebody who was previously married, and for whatever reason, we'll say with their best intentions, things did not go well. His spouse left. He's spent a couple of years. It's been hard, lonely, hurting, met a gal, fell head over heels, thought he could never feel this way again. He comes to you and he says, I'm at the point where I'm thinking about whether this should go further. But I guess my first question for you is, I want to know if I'm ready. Have I gone through whatever it is I need to go through so that next time I can do a better job than last time? How would you coach a guy like that?
Well, one of the things I would say to him is, I love your heart. I love your caution. I love the fact that you're wanting to learn and grow and understand and get perspective before you make decisions and not make them rashly. The other thing I would say to him is, on the other side of that is a truth that I have come to believe, and that's nothing really gets you ready for marriage. Marriage gets you ready for marriage. And unfortunately, what that means is we make our commitments, and then life teaches us what we committed ourselves to. And so on some level, we'll never know exactly what is going to be required of us. And that's the surprise of marriage. And I also think that's God's tool to shape us and mold us into the image of Christ. We didn't know what sacrifices we were going to have to make when we got married, but life teaches us what those look like. And then we do the best we can to try to live up to that. And so on some level, I want that future potential stepdad to really take a good, long, hard look at what being a stepdad involves. And on another level, all of us need to admit that we're never going to know exactly what's going to be required of him in his circumstances. And so there is a step of faith. There is a point of saying there's a risk here, and I'm willing to meet that risk, and therefore I choose to step in. And that choice, as it turns out, is incredibly powerful. It's kind of like the choice of following Christ. Do we really know what's going to be required of us? No, we don't know, but we step in with faith, and then we say, God, teach me, and take me where I need to be.
That's what I was thinking about as you were kind of unpacking that. I was thinking, seems like Jesus' words about him saying, what man who wants to be my disciple does not first count the cost?
Yeah.
And think about whether he's able to take on this weight, this responsibility. And I think to that person, as Bob's describing here, who's still on the front end of this, another thing I'd encourage him to do, that it sounds like he's doing if he's coming to you for advice, by the way, is to ask God for wisdom as he moves into this relationship with this woman. Secondly, as he moves into these multiple relationships with children, some of whom are already his, some of whom aren't his, and some of whom in the future may be theirs.
Yes, right.
I mean, the dynamics of this thing.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
And you stop and pull it all apart. Statistically, he's stepping into something that is more fraught with danger than his first marriage was.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Statistically, there's more chance that he'll get a divorce from the second wife than there was that he'd get a divorce from the first wife.
Right.
Not only that, but the degree of difficulty has just been increased by virtue of all of these relationships that Dennis is talking about. So I'm going to do something harder that is fraught with more difficulty, and it didn't go so well my first time out. You can see where a guy would go, I need to think this through pretty clearly.
And absolutely. Slow down and slow the pace of the courtship phase. That's one of the words that I would want to give to any couple. You may be ready as a couple, but it's a much more difficult thing to be a family than it is to be a couple. And so you have to say, this is a package deal. Let's pause. Let's prolong our courtship. Let's really get to know each other well, but let's also get some perspective and information about the blended family and what this might look like. And, here's the thing that it's hard for couples to hear this, but I think there's wisdom in this. If you don't think that you're cut out for the step-parent journey, it ought to be a deal breaker for a couple's relationship. That's hard to hear, but we're in love. We took our online couple checkup profile, and it says we're compatible, and there's so much going for us in our relationship.
Yeah, but let me stop you right there, because I can almost picture a guy who's about to become a stepdad going, I just like her. I like the way she makes me feel.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say he would lie to her, but love does make us a bit dishonest, does it not?
It does.
We tend to put our best foot forward. So what would you say to that guy who has a gnawing feeling in the back of his mind back here? I don't know if I can do this thing or not.
Yeah. I mean, those are just kind of some of the realities that I would want him to really own with himself. And I think, to have the courage to take that to her.
And discuss it as a couple.
And say, this is where I'm at. And would, be patient with me as we try to move forward.
And what about the distance between when the divorce has occurred and when this dating relationship started? Any cautions or red lights that you'd want to just...
Absolutely. Men marry quickly after divorce or after being widowed.
It is not good for man to be alone.
That's right. Men tend to marry more quickly than women do. And I do think that that's a caution, that a man who's listening to us right now should stop and think, okay, what is driving me to push this relationship forward? In my thoughts, I'm obsessed with this woman. she's great, she's wonderful, and I'm kind of saying, the stuff with the kids will be fine, and I'm minimizing that stuff as if it's nothing, when really Ron's telling me it's something. What is that about within me? And if a woman's listening right now, she's dating a guy, she knows a friend who's dating a guy, and we met on eHarmony, and we've met face-to-face once. We live on opposite sides of the universe, which, by the way, I'm hearing from these couples all the time. Oh, she has kids, and he has kids, and but that's not going to be a problem for us. We're in love. eHarmony says we're a match. Wait a minute. Slow down. That hurried, desperate need to be together with somebody is telling you something about yourself, and you really need to take that to heart and listen to that. There's a need there, perhaps an insecurity there, perhaps just a sense of, fish out of water. Whatever that is, you need to come to terms with that and get objective about it so that it's not driving you into a decision that wouldn't be a wise one.
A number of years ago, Bob and I interviewed Gary Richmond, who had a very vibrant ministry to remarrieds and blendeds at Fullerton, California. And I remember he used to say, for every 5 years you have been married, you should allow 1 year to recover after the divorce. So in other words, if you've been married for 20, you should take 4 years to recover before really considering remarrying.
And I want to dive in there because it seems to me that there's some significant spiritual work that needs to go on in somebody's life in that period from the end of a first marriage to the point where they're thinking about a second marriage, some issues that need to get unearthed spiritually and be dealt with spiritually, but I'm not sure I could put my finger on exactly what those were. What would you point somebody to in the midst of that?
Well, in general, let me just say that I do recommend that people really have a period of grieving and of coming to some resolution about a previous relationship, especially if it comes to an end in divorce. This is also true for somebody who loses a spouse through death. You do need to grieve. You do need to give yourself time and space to do that. And new relationships short-circuit that grieving process. How much time? That's so difficult to say. A rule of thumb for every so many years. Early in my career, I gave people time limits. I said, you need to wait this long. And now I've learned that life's more complex than that. And it's difficult to know. And for example, David Olson and I did a research study on remarriage relationships. We wrote a book called The Remarriage Checkup all about this. And one of the things that we found is that the couple's relationship can actually be just as strong 6 months into dating as it can be 3 years into dating. Now, that does not take into consideration the children or the ex-spouses or how that's going to create stress on the couple once they get married. So there's a whole lot of other factors here. But amount of time in courtship doesn't seem to be a real big factor in terms of quality of couple relationship. Having said that, though, I still think the more time people spend coming out of a relationship, especially a divorce, and allowing themselves to grieve and work through and resolve and ask those tough spiritual questions and get their heart right with God. If there's a sin issue that led to the divorce, they need to deal with that and not just skip over it and try to move on to the next relation. They need to deal with that. And then once they enter into a new relationship, now to spend a couple of years really at a pace that allows them not only to develop coupleness, but, if you will, familyness. And then there's confidence when you move into the next relationship. So, see, confidence is huge because people who go into blended family marriages most of them have been through something that was pretty devastating. They've been through hurt. They've been through, the pastor says marriage is forever, but life has taught them it's not. And so how do I gain confidence about this new marriage instead of living in fear? That's what that courtship, that extended courtship time helps to build.
Let me take you back, though, to the kind of the spiritual unearthing that needs to happen in somebody's life. How do you do an inventory to figure out whether your walk with God is at the right point where you can really begin to do marriage right? Because as we tell people all the time, if you don't have that relationship, your relationship with God right, your relationships with one another aren't going to work out. Mm-hmm. What kind of spiritual process does somebody go through just to say, okay, I just want to make sure that having gone through something that I never expected or hoped for, that I know God hates divorce and I've been through one, how do I deal with all of this and make sure I'm good with God before I go forward?
I think it's a multifaceted thing. And by the way, since we're talking about stepdads today, and you're wanting to have that spiritual integrity coming out of the divorce to be able to go in and be a leader in the new marriage and family, this makes your question even more critical. So multifaceted. I think he needs to get one or two accountability buddies that he can really talk turkey with, and they'll speak into his life about what they have seen in him and how he's lived and his choices, and even now how he's co-parenting with his ex-wife and whether that's showing integrity or not. I think going through some sort of structured program, a divorce care or divorce recovery ministry in his church that allows him to listen to other people, see some experts talk about things, study, and really give time and energy to resolving, reflecting, looking in the mirror. And then certainly that personal talk and walk with the Lord and listening to the Spirit's leading in his life. I think all of those things together would help bring somebody to a place where they feel like, okay, I've learned what I need to learn, and I think I'm ready to carry that into the next season of my life. And if that happens to be a new relationship, great. And if it's not, then that's okay too. You're listening to a Family Life Today flashback on Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. Okay, what you've just heard is us exploring things to consider before jumping into a blended family situation. But what happens once you're married? Well, that's the next part of our conversation. But first, Bob and Dennis share a theological view of brokenness that I think is helpful.
There's a passage in the Old Testament that there are just certain situations that whenever they come up, I find myself gravitating toward these few verses in Isaiah 61. And I think what we're talking about here today, as we talk about step-parenting and about stepdads in particular, I just think it helps with these words from the prophet Isaiah. He's talking about the Messiah coming. And he says one of the things that happens when the Messiah comes is he grants to those who mourn in Zion, gives them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit. And I just think it's good to know that God's ministry in our lives is a ministry of restoration, a ministry of reconciliation, and a ministry where we can look at the ashes that we've made, and God can say, watch this, I can make something really beautiful out of this.
You know, Bob, I'm glad you shared that passage because it just reminds me of something I said at a Weekend to Remember that I spoke at. And I stood in front of the audience and I said, we're all broken.
Yeah.
Look at me. Yeah. We're all a mess. This could be called Broken Life Today.
I think the ratings might go down a little bit.
It might, you know, but families are broken. We're not in heaven. We're on earth, and until we do get to heaven, they're made up of people who are in need of what you just read about, redemption, and about restoration. And it's interesting that the way this life is set up, God has given us His Spirit to those who have placed their faith in Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord, and He uses families and step-families to perfect His image in our lives.
Well, and the reason we bring it up and that you're on your soapbox on this is because of the subject we're talking about. We just have to acknowledge that a step-family is something that starts off from brokenness, but that doesn't mean that God can't do something beautiful in the midst of it.
A recent Pew Research poll found that 50% of all children will have a step-parent at some point in their lifetime.
And here's the thing that makes that interesting. Most step-families I know have had this experience. Before they became a step-family, those kids just thought this new guy was great. Mom, we really like him. He's so much fun. He takes us to the ball games. He buys the cotton candy. Yeah, we want you to marry him.
Well, that's because his role at that point was entertainer.
And to court.
Yeah, and he's winning the heart of their mother at that point and their hearts as well.
But 2 weeks later, when he's the disciplinarian, all of a sudden they don't like this guy so much. And Mom, why'd you marry him? And we don't want him around the house.
I can't imagine a more challenging assignment in a family. Truthfully, I really can't. And we're talking to both the moms in the audience and the stepdads in the audience. Now, you said to me, Ron, before we came in here, that one of the big issues for a stepdad, and as far as that goes, for the mom of the family, is the confusion over roles.
Yeah.
Unpack what you mean there.
Well, this stepdad went to a FamilyLife marriage conference, and he heard a lot of incredible speakers. And one of the things they talked about is the role of men, the role of a father, the role of a husband in the home. And he was inspired to see that it needed to be somebody who would initiate spiritual things for the family, that he would set them on a path that would lead them towards God.
He was going to be the spiritual leader, the servant of the family.
He's going to be the servant leader of the family, and he's inspired to go home and do that. And so he goes home and he begins to take that sort of initiative. And what he begins to experience from the children, though, is resistance, because they're looking at him like, okay, wait a minute, this is not your territory. Mm-hmm. You know, what are you doing here? I've got a dad, thank you very much. Or he experiences some frowns from his wife, who later comes to him and says, honey, I appreciate what you're doing, but that's not the way I've done it with my kids for the last 15 years or 9 years or 6 years. And she's very used to coming out of the single parent years, being the only authority in the kids' lives and making decisions and going with it. And they've got their patterns pretty well set. And he didn't realize it, but he's kind of creating new rules and new expectations from the children regarding behavior. And he's just trying to take initiative and do good things. He's really trying to be a really good father, and therein lies the bind for him, because sometimes being the good father is not the right step to make. It's being a good stepdad, being a smart stepdad. And he'll work within the power structure that is with his wife in order to take the initiative.
So the job description for biological father and the job description for stepfather are not the same job description.
I would say the job descriptions are very similar, but the methods and the strategies are different.
The execution
is what is different. He can still be the servant leader. He can still be the initiator in the family. He can still say, no, we're going to make these decisions about what TV shows we watch and about what activities we involve ourselves in, how we spend our money, because we're going to be good stewards and we're going to follow what God has called upon us to do. But when it comes time to make new rules, for example, about children and expectations and behavior, he's going to recognize that his role, he doesn't have much relational equity with the children, especially in the early phases of the blended family. And so he's going to recognize the limitations of his role and say, honey, okay, you and I are now in agreement that this is where we need to go. But you need to be the one who brings that to the kids. Because mom has that relational equity. She has enough in the bank with her own children.
They can't say to her, you're not my mom.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. There's no trump card with mom. And so again, he is taking initiative. He is making sure that the family is moving in a direction that will usher them into the throne room of God. But it might not be him who delivers the message to the children. It might be mom who does that. He's working through the power structure.
Okay, so here's my question, and I want to get to what he should do. Are there some things he ought not to do? I mean, some big-time cautions you would say to him, don't do this, for goodness sakes, don't say that?
I would say don't make unilateral decisions. I mean, you got to talk to mom. You got to collaborate with mom. And of course, I think you guys would say a biological dad in a biological home should not make just drastic unilateral decisions. It's a collaborative environment, but a stepdad especially needs to do that.
And the kids need to know it was a collaborative effort.
Absolutely. And that's mom's part of this process, is she's constantly working to create an expectation of respect for him, to communicate to her children. Yes, he's not your father, but he's my husband, and he and I together are running this household at this point in time, and you're not going to talk to him that way, young man. And she corrects her children, and what that does is it elevates his status in their eyes. And if mom doesn't do that, then he is fighting an uphill battle that can be really difficult.
Of course, mom feels bad because the kid's upset. Mom feels guilty that she's even in this predicament in the first place, that it's not the way it ought to be. Her heart's soft toward her child, her son or daughter, and goes, it's already been hard on him.
Yeah.
And so the temptation for her is to want to capitulate and say, let's let the kids run the house.
If a biological parent, in this case mom, is paralyzed by guilt, by the sadness she feels on behalf of her kids, then what she'll do is she'll just kind of roll over and give in. And that creates what I call that paralyzed parent syndrome. And that even makes it 10 times more difficult for a stepdad who's trying to find his place, develop his relationship. It's fragile in the beginning. And so if mom isn't right there communicating, hey, this guy, he can be here. He can stand with me. He counts. You need to listen to him. If she's not doing that, if she's inadvertently or on purpose, especially on purpose, it's really difficult. If she's undercutting him with the children, just think about what that would do to a man's spirit.
No doubt about it. You know, it seemed to me that a man would also struggle with the issue of authority. And at some point, he's going to want to play the trump card.
Yep.
I'm the dad around here.
Especially if, Dennis, he is a dad. If he's a biological father of his own children,
right,
and he knows what it is to be able to be that authority and to speak and say, nobody's arguing, this is the way it's going to be, it is such a confusing place to be in another household going, wow, I can't do that here.
So what does he do with that card? Hold it in his hand?
He holds it. He bites his lip. He backs off. He says, honey, come here. We need to have a powwow. And he and his wife go into the back room, and they try to get things square there first. Always the marriage first. Always decide it there. Gain that collaborative environment. Gain that support from your wife. Then go back and deal with kids.
Refuse to allow your children to divide you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And when the child does say, I hate you, you're not my dad, is there a good response to that child?
Yeah, I think the response is basically this. You're right, I'm not. However, I'm the man in the house right now. And your mom and I, see, here the position of unity, your mom and I have decided you have to go clean your room. You have to go out and take out the trash. And you have to do this. And you need to be in at this certain time. Your mom and I have decided that this is the way it's going to be. So this is the way it's going to be.
I'm just wondering if early on in a new blended situation, if there needs to be a come to Jesus powwow where you sit around with the kids and you say, you know, kids, we're all excited about this new adventure that God has us on, but the waters are going to get choppy along the way. And we all know that things are a little broken and not exactly the way we'd all like it to be, but we think God's in this. And here's what you need to know.
Yeah.
Here are the rules of the house going forward, and here's how we're going to get along, and everybody needs to agree with that.
Let me tell you a story. I had a couple call me one time. They were mentor couples, and they had just talked to this young couple that was getting married, and they were about 2 months away from the wedding. And here's the scenario. The new husband, the future stepdad, is an ex-Marine. He has no children. He's never been married before. He didn't really know how hard family life is. He's marrying a woman who has 3 children. He calls her on the phone, and they were talking about a few things, and he said, hey, regarding the kids and parenting, just tell your kids that when you and I get married, the Marines have landed. Ooh. All right? So his fiancée calls her mentor couple and says, what do I do? He's telling me he's going to come in, he's going to run the show, he's going to be the top dog, and what do I do about this?
And he's declaring war, sounds like.
He's declaring war. You know, beaches of Normandy, here we come. And so the mentor couples called me and said, what do we tell them? You know, what do we do? Well, I kind of talked them through some of these very things. And here's what I want you to know. 2 years later, I was speaking at a conference, and a woman came up to me and she said, you just told a story about the Marines have landed? And I said, yeah, that's how not to do it. And she said, well, that's me. And I said, oh, whoa. You're the woman, the mentor couple? You're the one who called me? And she said, no, my mentors called you about my future marriage.
Wow.
That's me. And I said, so what happened? Well, what happened was he came in and the Marines landed. He made the rules. He started barking. He expected people to jump when he said jump. The kids obviously stood in opposition to that. His wife desperately wanting to support his new role, wanting the kids to like it, wanting to kind of help connect them and build bridges, but at the same time, she couldn't deal with his hostility. She couldn't feel good about that. And so she found herself, kind of defending the kids and trying to speak for them. And eventually, it just began to really create a whole lot of stress in the marriage of the relationship. And I said, okay, so what happened? She said, well, the first 2 years, we just did that. We fought. It was ugly. And then what happened? I said. And then she said, well, he finally came to me one day, and he said he finally dug into some of your material, and he realized that he had made a mistake. And he came to me, and he apologized. And I said, wow. And then she said he went to my kids, and he apologized. And I said, wow. And how's that going? She said, well, they're healing. It's been about 6 months, and things are definitely getting better. But he had to back way off. Now, here's the point. He had to back way off from trying to be that authority figure who just demands a position in the kids' life.
The troops had to leave.
The troops had to leave. But listen to this. She said, and when he did, I realized that I had backed off trying to counterbalance him, and I wasn't being the authority I needed to be. I wasn't elevating his status in my kids' eyes. She said, I had to step up. And I said, that's exactly it. And if we could write the prescription for somebody who was just starting out, that's what we would say, is the biological mom has the relational equity with her kids to change rules, to make things happen, and to elevate the status of her husband in her eyes. He needs to tread lightly. He needs to come in and get to know them, build a relationship, and establish himself as a man they can trust. And when they trust him, Dennis, then they'll let him in deeper. And then he can take on more and more of an active, engaged servant leader in the home. But it's a role that he has to grow into with the kids.
It's a dance, isn't it?
It's a dance.
And as you're describing this, there's kind of a fundamental core concept that I'm going to throw out here that I don't think a lot of blended couples think about, but they really need to wrestle with this. And if they can't agree with what I'm about to say, then they may need to step back and decide, should we really consider a blended marriage? And that is this. In a blended relationship, the relationship between the husband and the wife ultimately trumps the relationship between the parent and the biological children.
That's right.
And if you can't get there, then you got no business blending a family.
You hope that it never comes to a which would you choose kind of a scenario. But at some point, the marriage really has to be the foundation. And in order for that to happen, the biological parent, in this case, the biological mom, has to be willing to do some hard work with her kids, to be willing to say, look, I know you guys want me staying here, but I need to go out on the date with him. That's a strong statement of her commitment and the solidarity of the marriage and the stepdad's importance to the family as a unit. The kids, some kids are just fine and dandy with that. Other kids will battle it and fight it and feel displaced and be anxious and upset about that. And you just have to kind of work with it slowly over time. It's never I choose him over you. It's I choose you both. But at the same time, this marriage is going to last forever. Mm-hmm.
I love the story that Dr. Dan Allender tells now. He's not a stepfather, but one time one of his kids asked if they were in a boat and the boat capsized. And the kid went in the water and Becky, his wife, went in the water. They asked Dan, who would you rescue? Dan said, that's easy. He said, your mother. And not only would I rescue her, I'd be in the boat drying her off. He wanted his child to understand that relationship has to be intact, preeminent, obviously, the first relationship being that of Jesus Christ, and both husband and wife, mom and dad, submitting to him. But the children are far more secure if they understand, whether they are a blended family or not a blended family, that the mom and dad are committed to one another no matter what.
Now, let me tell you something that's really confusing about this, because this is so central to the success of a blended family. Imagine you're a future stepdad. You've met this woman. You've fallen in love. You're dating kind of separate and apart from the kids. Your interaction with them is limited. It grows over time. You're kind of that fun-loving guy. Then you get married and you transition into real blended family life. And one of the things that you notice is very different is that this woman who seemed to be enthralled and totally focused on you during courtship, all of a sudden seems to be more of a mother than a wife. I can't tell you how many men are really thrown by that. They feel like they got duped. They feel like, what's going on here? She seems to be more interested in all the motherly activities and kids, and I'm just kind of the afterthought at that point. But when we were dating, man, she was all about me. And there's a couple things about that. Dating, tends to be unreal anyway. It tends to be kind of fantasy, and we tend to separate coupleness from familyness, and so it inherently moves her heart toward him, and all he sees is her being focused on him. But when she's at dinner with this guy, she's still thinking about her kids. Moms are totally always a mom, right? But he doesn't necessarily experience her being that way. But then when they're all living together in the house, and she kind of shifts her attention to being mom and caretaking, that can really be disillusioning for this guy. He needs to be careful and not overjudge her, not be quick to say, wait a minute, she's bailed on me, she's betraying me. No, I think she's just doing the hard work of balancing wife and mother roles. But at the same time, this woman needs to understand that she needs to attend to him as her husband, and she needs to be in tune with that need that he has, and not just totally shift all of her time and energy to the kids.
What are some best practices here for stepdads and wives as they experience a blended family?
Yeah, if the place you want to get is happy family, we're all getting along okay, it's functioning.
Happy family?
Well,
this sounds like a fortune cookie.
The place you want to get, what, functional family or no war going on or something? Just the kind of family where, we're getting along and life is good. If that's where you want to get, is there a map to get you there?
It's a great question. Actually, for this book, I assembled a group of stepdads who served as a sounding board to me. And some of the best practices that we all agreed upon are some things like this. Let the children set the pace for their relationship with you. Now, as a man, that can be difficult, especially if you're a go-getter kind of CEO type of person. You see the prize, you go after it, and you go and you get it. But when it comes to building a relationship with stepchildren, here's the real challenge. The pace at which that relationship is going to be developed is going to be determined by the kids, not by you. You can do the right things. You can say the right things. You can make yourself available in terms of time and energy and investing in things that they're interested in. But if they don't want you around, it's really hard to break in.
When do you know, as a stepdad, that you've won the turf in the human heart? How can you tell that maybe you've turned the corner?
It gets easy. I think, it went from hard to easy. That's when you've turned the corner. When it was anxious and you wanted to say, hey, let's go out and throw the football. But every time you did, you kind of got a big fat rejection, But all of a sudden, the kid comes to you and tosses you the ball. And it seems easy. That's when you've really turned a huge, huge corner in terms of developing that relationship. And so really the best practice is let the children set the pace, listen to what they're saying, try to work and come along beside them where they are. And along with that is the best practice of just knowing the limits of your role. In other words, you may want to be the hero, but if they don't let you be the hero, you can't be the hero.
Right.
And so it's okay that you just say, I'm going to take what they give me, what they open themselves up to, and I'm going to work with that. And we're going to keep growing and developing this relationship. It doesn't have to happen in a day.
Talk about the relationship between stepdads and daughters, because that can get a little awkward.
Yeah. And some of the men were really honest in my focus group, and I've heard so many men in counseling situations talk all the way around this, and you hear everything from, wow, that's never an issue for me, I don't know what you're talking about, to guys who say, she was 4 when I came into her life, and everything was great. She hopped up in my lap all the time, and then when she started, developing, hit puberty, and became a young woman, all of a sudden I was uncomfortable. And I didn't really know, I didn't ever want her to think that I was looking at her body or, had any thoughts because there's all that stuff going on out there. It happens. And when it happens, we hear about it on the news because it's quite controversial. And so you hear about abusive stepdads all the time. They make movies about this sort of stuff. And so there's this kind of awareness that, boy, I don't ever want her to feel uncomfortable around me. And that's just being honest. And I appreciate a guy who acknowledges that and says, you know what, I need to make a covenant with my eyes like Job did, and I need to manage where I look and how I touch. But at the same time, I think the temptation for some men when those girls hit adolescence is to back off.
Yeah, withdraw.
And you don't want to go too far, right? Because then she might perceive that as rejection and withholding, and you don't want that either. So it is a delicate balance. And one of the things I say to guys is, hey, don't try to figure this balance out on your own. Talk to your wife. Well, Ron, I can't do that. I mean, she's not going to understand it. Well, right now I'm talking to the women out there, and I'm saying, look, he needs to be able to talk to you about this and you not blow a gasket. He needs you to partner with him on this and finding appropriate ways of touching and hugging and expressing affection for her. And you not say, oh, that means you're a pervert. It does not mean that. He's being responsible. That's why he's bringing this to you. So partner with him on it.
And she can be his ally in the relationship with those kids. We've already talked a little bit about that this week, but she plays a critical role in helping him be set up to be the stepdad that God wants him to be.
Yeah, we talked earlier about mom has to elevate the status of the stepdad in the children's eyes initially. And over time, he's going to grow his own relationship with them and stand on his own 2 feet. But in the beginning, he's really dependent upon her to let the kids know, hey, he's in charge too. You know, she has to pass power, we say, to him as the stepdad. And there's another side to this, okay? And that's, don't be quick, Mom. Don't be quick to blame him for things that seem to go wrong. I mean, he may be trying to, as we just said, go with the kid's pace in terms of how open they are to him, how much time they want to spend with him, how much affection they want to share with him. He may be trying to gauge that and move along with them, but it may not be fast enough for Mom, and she may be critical of him. Well, that's a double bind, right? I mean, he's trying to work with the kid, but Mom's going, gosh, why aren't you in there? Why aren't you spending more time? Why aren't you doing this? Okay, Mom, you have a high need for your husband and your kids. I really understand this. You have a high need for them to get along and love each other deeply. And that's your need. Don't let that need cause you to be overcritical of him. That will discourage your husband. That will lead him to a place where he feels like he can't win for losing. And then he's really going to withdraw from you and the kids.
I've got a friend, his name is Tommy, and he tells the story of how he fell in love with a woman who'd been divorced. And as he pursued her, it became clear he was going to marry her. He connected with the ex-husband, and that relationship didn't go well at all. But Tommy hung in there, loving this guy, pursuing this guy at the same time he married his former wife. And finally, the end of the story is, Tommy says, now on Christmas morning, all the stockings are hung. Our 3 children's stockings are hung there, my wife, mine, and there's the ex-husband's stocking. And he celebrates Christmas. Now, that has to be an incredible story right there of the love of Christ overcoming enormous obstacles. That generally is not the way this whole thing works out. It seems to me the whole blended family situation is set up to be a catastrophe in terms of the ex.
Yeah, I never saw the movie, but there was a movie came out years ago called Stepmom that was all about that, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's very common. In fact, in the book, The Smart Stepdad, we talk about how if you're the stepdad and your wife has an ex-husband, then he is your ex-husband-in-law, which means he is a part of your life, he is a part of your family, he is an extended family member, whether you like it or not. And so you forever are going to live in the shadow of who that man is. And that goes from one extreme to the other. If he is an open, loving, Christian, good-hearted man, then you're going to reap the blessings of that because he's going to be telling your stepchildren, hey, you need to listen to your stepdad because he's in charge when you're over at his house. But it will also go to the other extreme of when that ex-husband-in-law is an addict or unreasonable or mentally ill or whatever that case may be, you're going to unfortunately pay the price for that as well. And so that's a hard reality sometimes. Again, some men, it's harder than others, especially a dad who maybe has raised his children, maybe he's a little later in life, and he knows what it is to be in charge of his home and be able to set rules and have structures, and they be followed. But then when he finds himself in a situation with an ex-husband-in-law whose erratic behavior is causing chaos rippling into his life, that's really, really tough.
It seems to me to be a setup for one guy to want to be the hero, the stepfather stepping in, kind of I'm here to win the day, and you could kind of end up putting the other guy down, pointing out his flaws and weaknesses and bad habits, while trying to make yourself look good.
And one pitfall is, turning to his wife and saying, listen, I don't know why you let him get away with that. No, don't let him talk to you that way. That's your ex-husband. And no, don't let him change the custody or visitation plans this weekend. You can't allow that. You got to stand up to him. Well, she's been dealing with her ex-husband for years, and I'm not saying she's dealing with it in the correct way. What I'm saying is if you become overly critical of your wife and how she's dealing with her ex-husband and not working with her and trying to come beside her and understand what that relationship is all about, then all of a sudden she's going to turn on you as the stepdad. She's going to say, what are you saying? And now you're going to be pushed and marginalized to the side. There's a lot of pitfalls in this. And that's why I always caution couples, no matter who we're dealing with here, if it's a child, if it's a former mother-in-law, if it's the ex-husband-in-law, you as a couple really work very hard to guard and protect your marriage and not let that external stress become internal stress.
Guys are naturally competitive in the first place, so it would seem like the dynamic between husband one and husband two is just going to have this natural kind of who's the better guy, who's the better husband built into it.
There's actually a phenomenon where ex-husbands, fathers who have maybe dropped out of their kids' lives maybe after the divorce, about 15% of dads just disappear after a divorce. We call them the vanishing fathers. Well, many of them are reactivated when their ex-wife remarries. So now, all of a sudden, a stepdad is in the picture, and he becomes what we call a remarried, activated dad. And now bio dad is involved in the kids, and now he wants to see them on visitation weekends. He hadn't seen them in a couple of years, and now he's insisting on it. And now he's saying things about going back to court if you don't follow through with the custody agreement that we had that he hasn't followed himself. And all kinds of weird things begin to happen because there's a stepdad in the picture, and this bio dad is threatened. He feels like, wait a minute, he's coming in and he's going to have more time with my kids than I'm going to have with my kids. And for whatever reason, that competition, it's on. And boy, that stepdad may be hit with that out of the blue, especially because if this guy has been uninvolved in his kids' lives, the whole time he was dating this woman, he wasn't even a factor.
Right.
And now all of a sudden he is a factor. Mm-hmm. And that's one of those complexities that why we wrote this book, is to try to help give some guidance, not only to the stepdad, but to the mom as well. The book is as much for the mom as it is for the stepdad.
I could see a situation where a child, a stepson or stepdaughter, just in their hurt, are being wounded by the absence of their biological father, would just be sad.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the conversation occur between them and the stepfather. The natural tendency of a stepfather at that point, again, would be to make himself look good,
right,
and kind of make the other guy look bad. Yeah. And yet what I hear you saying, in those moments, it would be wise to not put the other guy down.
Absolutely.
But to say, I got to believe he loves you. There may be things going on in his life, perhaps, that prevent him right now from being able to come see you, because he may show up again someday.
Yeah, at that point, the stepdad is a grief counselor. He's ministering to this child's heart who is sad over their father not really being engaged actively in their lives. And so, he's doing a couple things. He's ministering to the child's heart. He's acknowledging their sadness and grief. He's refraining from putting down the biological dad, because a kid will turn on him in a hurry, because this child is going to have a deep loyalty to their father. And the other thing I would want that stepfather to do in that scenario is leave the door open. I mean, I'm not saying you can't ever set boundaries with a really dysfunctional biological dad. Sometimes you do. But if that bio dad would come and bring his heart back towards his children and want to reconnect, a stepdad should not be in the way of that. And you don't have to be afraid that he's going to come in and they're going to push you out. I mean, sometimes there's complexities that go along with that. But whenever a child can be restored to their parent, it is in the child's best interest for that to happen.
Ron, I just got to talk about the elephant that I think is in the room for some of our listeners, and they've heard us talking this week about step families and making the most of a step family situation, and they're thinking, gee, it almost sounds like you're saying that if a first marriage doesn't work out, maybe the second one will work out better. You know, we can almost sound like we're undervaluing the marriage covenant in all of this. And we've told couples for years at our Weekends to Remember or wherever we're ministering, the marriage that God wants you to honor, the covenant he wants you to honor is the one that you're in right now. Whatever got you there, we're not here to try to dissect that and figure out, well, what about this and what about that? If you're in a marriage relationship right now, that's the covenant God wants you to honor and live out and live it as godly as you can. But I know there are some folks who hear this whole comment about step parenting and they think, why are you even giving advice? They shouldn't even go near step parenting. They should go back to their first spouse and get that all right. And what do you say to those folks?
I think there's two questions at the heart of this. One is, if you're not yet married, I think you do need to take a good, hard look at your situation. And what about reconciliation of the first marriage? And what about that? And what are my obligations to the Lord? If you are, however, already married, the woulda, coulda, shouldas have kind of gone by the wayside. There is a new covenant and a promise that needs to be kept. And I would want that couple to keep that promise and do as best of a job as they can to honor that before God.
Well, and we do have some illustrations in Scripture where we see blended situations with God's blessing on them. I don't know that you'd call David's relationship with Mephibosheth a blended family, because we don't know anything about what David's relationship with Samuel's wife would have been. But here it's almost a step parenting relationship where he says, the blessings of my house are going to be yours. Are there other illustrations that come to mind for you?
Nearly all of the Old Testament families are blended families of one shape or another, and not necessarily because of divorce and remarriage, because of multiple marriage.
Polygamy, yeah.
But nevertheless, they have dynamics that mirror modern-day stepfamilies. And then there's the situation of Jesus. You know, I think it's an interesting question to say, did Jesus have a stepfather? I'm always quick to point out to people, I think it's pretty significant that there was a moment when Joseph found out that Mary was pregnant, that he almost walked. I mean, think about that. In the book, we talk about how attachments are different for biological dads than they are for stepdads. And you just don't feel the same heart connect. Well, right there in Scripture, we see Joseph walking away from this situation. But the Spirit of God says, no, come back. There's something bigger going on here. And he does, and he submits to that process. And I think it's really significant that he then chooses to father Jesus. Which I find very profound, that the God of the universe, who chooses to leave heaven and come here to love and serve us the way we needed to be loved and served, is immediately chosen to be loved and served by a stepdad, if we can call him that. And Joseph does a great job. I mean, we don't know much about Joseph and how he parented and who he was, but he seemed to be pretty significant to the story. I want to encourage stepdads. I want to encourage moms who are out there who are married to a man who's a stepdad to their children. You can have an incredible role in the life of a child. You can, in effect, be the redemptive work of God in the life of that child, bringing perhaps out of sadness and loss something that's stable and secure and loving, being, if you will, the stand-in person who points them to God. That's an amazing process, and when a man chooses that, he is to be honored for it. You've been listening to a Family Life Today flashback here on Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal, and Stepdad, we do honor you for standing in the gap, for taking on responsibilities that are not yours, and for loving children not your own. I hope you do, but you may not hear this on Father's Day. But you're going to hear it from me right now. Thank you for stepping in and stepping up. Hey, let me encourage you to pick up a copy of The Smart Stepdad for yourself or a stepdad that you know. The audio edition is perfect for anyone with a commute. And moms, hey, there's 2 chapters in this book just for you. You play a big role in helping him find his place with your children. So read and share the book together. And to give you a taste of that book, at the end of this episode, remember, I'm including a bonus Get Smart segment where I read part of The Smart Stepdad. I hope you'll listen. If you're not familiar with FamilyLife or our division, FamilyLife Blended, I hope you'll visit us online. FamilyLife Blended has the world's largest collection of resources for blended families. Check us out. The show notes will tell you how. If you don't mind, we'd love a quick review. Melissa said on Facebook, hands down, some of the best advice we've been able to get our hands on, from books to podcasts to live stream events, Family Life Blended has been a godsend for this crazy, loving, messy, blended family. Well, we're glad to hear that, and we hope that others of you will check us out as well. If you haven't subscribed to this podcast, boy, you sure can. We would hate for you to miss any episode. Just go to the FamilyLife app or Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you want to get your podcast. Just search Family Life Blended. Now, on our next Family Life Blended podcast, we'll hear from financial planner Greg Pettis about investing for retirement and life when the kids are gone.
Doesn't matter whether my resources shut down, I got laid off, or the stock market dropped. These are resources. If I keep my eye on the source, I'll be okay.
That's Greg Pettis next time on Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. Thanks for listening, and thank you to our Family Life Legacy partners for making this podcast possible. If you as a listener want to support us, you can do that by making a tax-deductible donation specifically for Family Life Blended. The show notes will tell you how you can do that. Our chief audio engineer is Keith Lynch, Bruce Goff, producer. Our mastering engineer is Justin Adams, project coordinator Ann Ancaro, and theme music provided by Braden Deal. Family Life Blended is part of the Family Life Podcast Network. Pursue the relationships that matter most. Oh, and hey, remember, stay with me for the bonus Get Smart segment. Hey, thanks for sticking around for this Get Smart bonus. It is my honor to share with you a section from my book, The Smart Stepdad. I should mention that non-transferable permission to read content from the 2011 edition of The Smart Stepdad has been granted to me by my publisher, Bethany House, a division of Baker Publishing Group. A link in the show notes, by the way, will connect you to their website, bakerpublishinggroup.com. I'm very grateful to them for allowing me to share this content with you. The Smart Stepdad is available wherever books are sold. Now, here's where we're jumping in. At the end of Chapter 1, I list 12 best practices for stepdads, whether young or old, new or veteran. I'm going to be sharing 7 of those 12 best practices with you here. Consider how you might put them into practice. Best practice number 1. Understand the limits of your role. You know, it's not your responsibility to undo the past. Years of poor parenting from your wife or her ex-husband, the negative consequences of divorce, or the pain children experience when a father dies is not yours to resolve. Come alongside children in these situations and try to offer a positive influence over time, but don't try to be the white knight in shining armor. Just love them. Best practice number 2, round off your rough edges. In my book, The Smart Step Family Marriage, co-authored with David Olson, we reported that the number one predictor of strong marriages and step families was the absence of rough personality characteristics in the couple. According to our research, being stubborn, critical, controlling, moody, jealous, or having a temper predicted with over 92% accuracy whether couples were healthy and strong or fragile and unhappy. I've long said that the same applies to relationships with stepchildren. If your personality is naturally angry, critical, aggressive, controlling, or stubborn, don't expect them to warm up to you. And don't expect your wife to entrust her children to you either. Best practice number 3, partner with your wife. She needs to believe that you are committed to and care about her children, and their past experiences before you will receive her trust. Therefore, do a lot of listening before injecting your opinion. Demonstrate an authentic appreciation for all she has done to provide for her children before trying to make suggestions. When you do make suggestions, especially early in your family, be sure to reveal your heart's intentions first. Consider the contrast between harshly saying, "Your son is a lazy boy. When are you going to get him up in the morning, get him to school on time?" and saying, "I've come to really care about David. I'm hoping to offer some guidance to him and better prepare him for life. I've noticed he's struggling to manage his time and responsibilities with school. Can we talk about how we might encourage more responsibility in him?" There's quite a difference between those two. Best practice number 4. Until you've earned your respect, let your wife handle punishment with her children. Now, this topic deserves much more explanation, so I'll devote a lot of time to this matter in Chapter 5. For now, let me make the point that leadership and the ability to offer punishment that shapes character are a function of emotional attachment with a child. Many stepdads mistakenly assume that not taking the lead is a sign of weakness. Actually, it's an indication of strategic wisdom and strength. So while taking the time to build a solid relationship and gradually move into discipline, trust your wife to continue being the primary parent to her kids. Best practice number 5. Be patient with your wife, especially when her past creates emotional baggage that you can't change. Danny shared that his wife's first marriage left a lot of emotional scars on her that he thought he could change. "I didn't have a clue how hard it would be for her to overcome them," he said. "We've been together for 9 years, and I'm still dealing with her insecurities. It's part of who she is, though, so I just deal with it and go on." At first, Danny thought he could love it out of her, but in time, he came to see that ultimately this was her mountain to climb. He could choose to love her as best he could, but in the end, she would have to deal with the emotional residue from her first marriage. Best practice number 6. Unless proven otherwise, assume your stepchildren would pick their dad over you. In Chapter 4, we'll discuss a child's loyalty in detail. For now, recognize that a huge step toward gaining your stepchildren's respect comes from respecting their relationship with their father, even if he's deceased, and not positioning yourself in competition with them. Doing so just pushes them farther away from you and closer to their dad. Tim, a dad of 2 and stepdad to 2, understands this well. "I have always tried to keep in mind what I want my child to hear from my ex or her new husband about me. I then apply the golden rule to my stepkid's dad. If, on the other hand, I put the kids in a position of having to choose between me and their dad, I always assume they would choose him. This is especially difficult at times when I want to selfishly one-up him to make myself look better. This also means that when my wife and stepkids are bad-mouthing him, I have to keep from being drawn into that discussion. They will turn on me in a heartbeat." Best practice number 7 of the 12. Remain engaged. Through the years, I've worked with many disengaged stepdads and their families. The reasons for their drift varied. One man had a "these aren't my kids" attitude. Another had an extremely introverted personality, and he simply didn't know how to engage people in general, let alone his stepchildren. Still others found themselves paralyzed by the guilt of not being around their biological children. "How can I really enjoy my stepkids when I feel like I'm shorting my kids of my time?" one man said. "In some bizarre way, I think I'm making it up to my kids when I deny myself time with my stepchildren." Still, other stepdads find that once they've disengaged, which may have been initially part of surviving the confusion of their role, they cannot find their way back. Even when you don't feel that you have any influence with your stepkids or aren't accepted by them, you hold an important role in their lives. When you married their mother, God positioned you as a role model, a friend, a teacher, a mentor. The specifics of how intimate your role will become cannot be predicted, but you have a responsibility to make the most of the opportunities you are given. You can be a blessing to your stepchildren, but not if you don't engage. To the best of your ability, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. Well, that's your Get Smart book bonus on this edition of Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. I pray this bonus is a blessing to your life.